I have to say that it's very nice to be in a room full of people who want to know about otters. Because normally it's me in a room with the people who are a community who's at loggerheads about baboons. And you've got extremes on both sides, and I know I'm doing my job well when I get into trouble from both sides. So I hope that tonight can be, the temperature can be lower than it normally is in these community meetings, and we can share the information that my students, Nicola Oakes, who did a PhD, and you've probably heard a talk by her before if you're interested in otters, because Nicola was our first student to work on otters, and then Amelia, who did her honours project, and then my postdoc, Zoe Woodgate, who's helped with all the analyses. So these are they. People say this is a very unusual photograph of otters because they look a bit down, a bit depressed, sort of grumpy, sleepy, and snoozy over here. But I chose it because, well, they're showing some sort of signs of sociality here. We do see fairly large groups. This is on the coastline here, Simonstown. And just to give you some of the key features of them, they're carnivores. They're part of the mustelids, so badgers, things with musky glands. They like to mark their territory. They've got these vibrissae, or these whiskers, which is very much like the naked marmots and the dune marmots that you mentioned, and that's because they have to get a lot of tactile information at the front of their heads when they're foraging in dark places, either at the bottom of a lake, on the bottom of a river, or in our case, very often the ocean. They've got this nice counter shading, dark on top and light on the underside. Now, whenever I see counter shading, I think of something like a white shark is beautifully counter shaded, dark on top and white on the underside, and that's for predation purposes, to be cryptic when they're doing their predating business. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure how much of this is relevant, how much of that is relevant to otters. But essentially, there are apex predators in our freshwater systems here on the peninsula. And they're now going into the ocean where there are other apex predators and new challenges. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today, is to show how the otters of Cape Town, of the Cape Peninsula, have paid the price for how we've treated our freshwater systems. And as a result of that, they're having to make a new living in the ocean. And we're very lucky to have the ocean. I think the otters in the rest of South Africa, because Cape Clawless otters are distributed throughout South Africa, are in for a tough time. I think in Gauteng and the likes, things are getting almost impossible for otters in many of the river systems. So this is a manifestation of, we're in the Anthropocene, even though the geologists don't want to use the word, us ecologists have embraced it. During the Anthropocene, unfortunately, our cities, our need for agriculture, we've transformed the land, we've destroyed a lot of the natural vegetation, we've fragmented what's left, and we've degraded the rest. And this is not everywhere, but it's most of the places. We've also overexploited. Otters have been heavily exploited historically for fur throughout the world. We've introduced exotic species which have competed with and sometimes led to the extinction of other species. And all of these, and we're going to come on to this word here, trophic cascades, during the talk, because as we interfere with our natural systems, we inadvertently change the way the entire food web is functioning, with unintended consequences and knock-on extinction effects. So this is us. We're all part of this. I'm part of it. Nothing much we can do about it other than acknowledging that we've done it and then trying to be Homo sapiens, trying to be clever about possible solutions. So globally, we're seeing a variety of species that are actually pushing back into urban areas, that are exploiting novel resources in these urban spaces. So we've got boar walking the streets of Berlin, and we've got fox on the streets of London, and we've got coyotes in downtown Los Angeles, and of course the raccoons. The only species which I think is vaguely close to baboons, because they've got dexterity. So we see these are sort of medium-sized generalist species that have learned to exploit the novel environments that we make in our urban areas, and typically we've got a lot of food. So if you're capable of doing it, if you can exploit urban environments, you can do extremely well. You can become hyper-abundant even. And we're even finding a return of large predators, apex predators, so mountain lion, bears, wolves. Just today I read that Europe started a wolf culling plan. I think it was Daily Maverick article actually, and yeah, it's a sign of the success of many of these apex predators, which were typically the first to disappear from our landscapes. Even they are making a comeback, and it's causing a lot of difficulties because as much as it's nice to rewild and have them back, we're also trying to grow food, and we're also trying to go for a jog. So, you know, we've had people killed by mountain lions, we've had people killed by bears in Europe. There's been a famous court case about a bear that killed a jogger, and they wanted to put it down, and there was a court case about its rights, and its rights won, and it's now living in a sanctuary for the rest of its life because it couldn't be put down. And so we're seeing remarkable changes globally in terms of how humans and wildlife interact. But nothing compares. Sinead O'Connor's song should be playing in your ears. Nothing compares in the entire world to dealing with baboons. Nothing. There's no bear that's as agile or dexterous. This is baboons coming out of an apartment that they spend the night in. This is in the Navy. The Navy in Dagama. How about that? It was vacated. They left the window open. The baboons went in. It was raining that night. Had a lovely evening. You can imagine what it looked like the next day, because there were tokens of appreciation all over the apartment. Nothing. Look at this. Look at this for beautiful dexterity. You're going to hold what's coming, and you're going to manipulate what you're already eating. And very few things could open a peanut butter jar, but boy, the rewards are great. And even cars. Cars, doors, you name it, every type. So I believe that if we got baboons right, everything else would be easy. And of course, what I underestimated was the fact that we live in a world full of us, full of our different value systems, our different religions, and all of it confounded by social media. So our ability to communicate and misinform each other and get into WhatsApp groups which become echo chambers and espouse your opinion. And I was not prepared for that as a scientist. I think my foundations were rocked. And in fact, on Carte Blanche this Sunday, you'll see me telling the world how my foundations were rocked. Because I wasn't prepared for the avalanche of diversity that we face whenever we're dealing with wildlife in an urban setting. And people in urban areas have changed. They've changed the way they think about animals. They're more mutualistic, and that's largely because they're divorced from where their food comes from and the difficulties of getting food without killing animals. So I like to say that wildlife management is not rocket science. It's much more difficult. Rocket science, you've got to get that heavy thing, use physics, propulsion, you just got to get that up. Yeah? And maybe back, but at least up. That's the principle here. Whereas if you're trying to dislodge an elephant, you've got the complexity of the elephant's social structure, the elephant's social experience, you've got all the people and their experiences, it's their lives, their livelihoods. This is infinitely complex, infinitely difficult to deal with. So human behavior, while it's the cause of most of the challenges that we face, we also are the ones that have to come up with the solutions. And all these contentious debates that we have about animals is due to the multiplicity of the values that people have towards wildlife, and they're changing. And so the sociologists and the psychologists need to roll up their sleeves and they need to get in there. They need to help us wildlife biologists do what we do, and they can focus on the people, because we've really been struggling. And so conservation practitioners in particular have to adopt a multidisciplinary approach. And I'm not doing a multidisciplinary approach today with the Otters. I can sit back and give ecological and biological understandings. I don't have to go into that space, but I want you to be aware of the fact that sitting behind all of this is the real difficulty associated with understanding wildlife and people. And that's why we started the Institute for Communities and Wildlife in Africa. We have these conservation conflicts. So what this means is a conservation conflict is when humans disagree on how best to manage a wildlife system, or how best to address or mitigate some difficulty that we're experiencing with animals. So perhaps we're worried that otters are suffering too much from pollution. Well, how do we fix the waterways? And so people get into conflict about how to fix the problem that's driving some sort of challenge to do with conservation. And in blue here, this is UCT. We're trying to understand the drivers primarily, because we're not doers, and we rely on government, professional organizations, and NGOs, such as yourselves, such as this group. I guess you're an NGO, are you? An NPO or an NGO? Yeah, and we try to understand the wildlife, we try to understand the society through sociology, and it's up to the government and these professional NGOs to provide expertise, policy, and law. And so this makes it so complicated, anything that you deal with. And this is a tiny smorgasbord of the sort of interactions. These are all the people you've got to deal with as soon as you ask a question about an animal and how it relates to people. You've got all these government departments, you've got all these professional organizations, all these NGOs. Everyone wants a piece of this pie. Everyone has an opinion on it. And it doesn't matter which species you're dealing with. And then even at UCT, it doesn't stop at biology and sociology, it's the economics of wastewater treatment. It's the economics of informal settlements that don't have adequate wastewater and sewage, and therefore that gets into the systems. And it's the history. How did we get here? What's the history of otters? How did they interact with the huge hippo population that we used to have? So that immediately becomes part of it. And then of course there's philosophy, how we think about these things, how we relate to each other, politics, and even the arts. I mean, otters and artists almost go hand in hand. But artists can change the way we think about complicated situations better than scientists can, because they can open our minds to a different way of thinking about old problems. So that's what we do. This is incredibly complicated approach to trying to understand the complicated relationship between wildlife and society. Now, a special challenge that we have with wildlife is that, with otters in particular, is that most of our urban areas are close to rivers and the ocean. So obviously for transport purposes and for access to fresh water and agriculture. And as a result, the preferred habitat of otters has been severely impacted. Wetlands areas, as they come down to this confluence of these two habitats, is critical habitat for many species because it's so productive. But unfortunately, through pollution and through agriculture, we end up with situations like this over here, where you get mass fish die-off events because we've eutrophied the system or fundamentally damaged it. So that's been the story of our rivers, from the Thames through to any of our major rivers through to the Black River. It wasn't called the Black River because of what we've done to it now. It's black in the wrong sense. It was just the tannins that came from the famous, but it's now black in another sense. It's black in a very polluted sense. So if we look at otters worldwide, and this is fairly old data from 2012, and we look at the IUCN Red List, black is endangered, so we've got otters throughout the world. 9 of the 13 species were either near threatened, threatened, or endangered. And unfortunately, this least concern has gone to near threatened. So the otters, since my PhD student started, have now lost. They've gone one stage worse. And that's because the damage we're doing to our river systems in Southern Africa, South Africa, Africa actually, the entire distribution. So in Europe, we're seeing a renaissance. They've cleaned up their act a bit, they've fixed their river systems, they're trying to fix their river systems. It's a long process. And we're seeing the return of the European otter throughout many parts of Europe. This is in England itself. And they're very good at using our infrastructure. There's an otter popping out of a stormwater drain, and this is very common in Cape Town. The way that the otters are accessing Greenpoint Park is from the ocean through the stormwater drains, and they just pop up in this lovely urban park we've created. Say thanks for all the fresh water. So yes, otter crossings, that's because the otter populations are returning, and one of the greatest threats that otters face, in fact most of our wildlife, is our roads. In Singapore, one of the great success stories in terms of rehabilitating a city and greening it, they've improved their water quality. Look at this. I mean, you've got a huge group of otters that went run around in the urban area, and unfortunately they came across a jogger. And they were moving between two water bodies. They felt very threatened because they were navigating their way through the streets of Singapore, and they attacked him. And it was a very serious incident. In fact, there's quite a few of these. Now, I'm not saying otters, this is not really the otters way, otters do bite. Otters are carnivores, otters have big teeth, and if they feel threatened, they will bite. But these success stories are coming with their own challenges. And I'm very glad to say that there was no attempt to get rid of those otters. There was just an education program to explain to everyone why this might have happened. So, I was born there, and I grew up there, and I live here. So they've always been part of my landscape, these otters. Aonics, anyone know what aonics means? A for atypical, it's not typical, and so not clawed. Not clawed, not hooved. So it's a clawless otter. They do have vestigial claws on their hind feet. If you ever sadly come across a dead one, have a look at the back feet and you'll see these strange little vestigial claws sitting in a silly part of their feet, not where they could do any action. And many of you might think of otters as freshwater specialists, but you're more likely here to see them at the coast. And in fact, on the, at beaches like Glencairn, there's pictures of the otters coming up. This is typically what they'll do when they see you walking on the beach. They're not too sure what you are. They're not trying to mimic you being bipedal. They're just trying to get a vantage point to see you and your dogs. They're great at interacting with dogs, but you should keep your dogs away because otters are feisty. Even the Karoo farmers will tell you that their sheep get attacked by otters, which is quite remarkable. This is pretty much all I saw of otters for my PhD students to type, just footprints. And fortunately that they do leave them, and they are so distinctive because our beaches are full of dog prints. But when you see an otter print, you know exactly what it is. We tried camera trapping, but camera trapping really wasn't suitable. And because our green areas are so heavily used by people without homes, we lost these at a rate. So we found that very difficult, and we had to resort to what we call a sign survey. So using scat, which fortunately they like to leave in very prominent places as a form of marking their territory. So they defecate and then using their footprints, and it's because of the beaches that we really were able to get leverage on this, because they leave such great tracks on the beach. And then of course you, citizen scientists, members of the public, and I really am going to be looking for you. We've got another project starting, we need your help. I'm going to be looking for shit seekers. So if anyone feels like they're up for collecting some scat, we're very interested in trying to work out what the microplastics are doing and how much they're getting into the otters. Everyone seems to be interested in that. But yes, Nicola set up the Peninsula Otter Watch, and I don't know how many of you participated in that. I'm sure some of you were part of that, where you just gathered information, record, and then we would phone you and you'd send it through, or you'd email it to us, and these were citizen sightings, and it proved to be remarkable, because we got information that we would never normally have got. Otters living under people's houses, and all sorts of interactions. Photographs came in. These are otters on motorboats. This is quite a famous story. You might remember this at Delbrook. Yeah, where he got into a bit of trouble. That's why I blanked his face out. It's a pity because he looks like that gladiator chap, Russell Crowe. So it's like quite a photograph. And I must say, as a biologist, I'm fascinated with this. I mean, it's not a good thing for either, but I'm still absolutely mesmerized that a wild animal, and there's question marks here, how wild was this? This happened straight after COVID, and I'm not sure whether there wasn't a cozy relationship between some otters, some young otters, and some people, because it's just remarkable. And there was lots of this. I'll show you a video later on. Hopefully the video works, but it was truly remarkable, some of the interactions people were having. Otters we've had some incredible stories coming in of people saying their entire koi pond got cleaned out last night. Their fish were tortured more than my car. And we would silently chuckle, but then we realized that this is a potential conflict space, because people get very, very upset with their koi's being eaten. And we had this in Higo Vale. I mean, this was particular pictures from Komaki, but in Higo Vale, who would have guessed? Right up there by Ranyazit, otters coming up the glen, over what's the neck called there? Kloof Neck, over Kloof Neck, and into that residential area, and cleaning out the goldfish and the... Sorry, just to go back, Can't go back. Can I go back? Yes, I can go back. Yeah. This, unfortunately, we think is that very friendly otter in the arms. Okay, so it started stealing fish from fishermen. The fishermen, so for some of them, that's livelihood. That's actually living food. And here's another one. This is one of the two. There were two very friendly otters on that side, and we think that's the other one that got run over. So this is unfortunately the signature of an urban living otter. As much as we love to see wildlife in urban spaces, it really can be very hazardous towards them. And then some of the stuff we got was just remarkable. Not sure how to, yeah. I mean, this is in Simonstown. It's like children. They're playing tag. So otters need access to fresh water to keep their fur clean, and because they don't have a layer of fat, abdominal fat, so they need very good insulative properties, and seawater doesn't do it for them, so they've got to clean themselves every day in fresh water. And they also need to drink that fresh water. And swimming pools that aren't salty make for a great, fun day. It's funny enough that baboons do the same thing. But I mean, that's quite a sighting. And the people got out and they walked around the pool with these otters. All right, so here we have 400 square kilometers of peninsula, our beloved finger into the ocean. And we went about, this is what scientists do, we went about trying to understand what could drive the distribution of otters. Where are the otters on the peninsula? What habitat do they need? What sort of areas are they using? So in green there, you've got Tab Mountain National Park. And those are the mountainous areas. In the blue here, you've got marine protected areas. We thought those would be important. We think otters would like to be in those areas. We obviously need to look at the river system. So we plotted all the rivers. Notice the lack of rivers down here. So the Cape Point or Cape Aguda section of the Tab Mountain National Park it's got lots of little seep zones though. For those of you who walk there a lot, and that's all the otters need. They just need a little trickle, just to. And so we were quite surprised to find that if we plot the wetlands here, that's really what predominates down here, and that's very suitable for the otters too. And then we looked at household density. You can see there's Masipumalele and Imizamo Yetu. So two informal settlements pop up immediately in terms of density, and you can see an image of it there. And of course, look at our road network. In black, the spaghetti, and that's the real threat. Porcupines seem to be okay, but baboons, otters, and caracal in particular, really do suffer on our road networks. And of course, the urban land use. So there's our urban land use. And what we would do is we would go to each one of the major river systems in Cape Town. We would walk up them doing a science survey, and we would then plot our roads. We would plot our different habitat types, wetlands, golf courses. We would put in our residential density data, and then we would ask, where are the otters in relation to all these variables? How are they, how close are they to roads? What elevation are they occurring at? How close are they to the urban edge? How close are they to a marine protected area? Are they near wetlands? And how does it relate to the population density and the water pollution in that particular river? And so we would hypothesize perhaps that because we mostly live up here, this is high density and there's very little down here, that there'd be more otters down there and less at the top. And then we put this into a modeling framework, and we try and make predictions, and we see what best predicts otter presence. And what best predicts otter presence on the peninsula was distance to marine protected areas. So if you were near a marine protected area, you had a much higher probability of finding an otter. So that was the first clue that it wasn't, freshwater river systems, and that was our first understanding. And then, so remember what we hypothesized, and then this is the darker we divided the peninsula up into little squares, and then we asked each one of these squares what's the probability of finding an otter. And you can see that there's not too much up there. Hart Bay, so coming down to Komaki, you've got your system here, the sand system. So quite a few over here, then we're going down the coast, and then you've got some of the wetlands. so that was the sort of distribution, and yeah, it was more the middle, not the bottom, not the top, but more in the middle here. And estuaries and wetlands were clearly quite important systems. And then we waited 5 years and we repeated the study. And during those 5 years, we went through day 0 and peak load shedding. And so those were interesting moments, because what we thought about those was, now hold on, day 0, if you get less water, you're going to get higher salinity, you're going to get concentration of your pollutants. So these are negative signals. And of course, load shedding. That means failing waterworks systems, failing sewer pumps. And so, unfortunately, the bad news is that we've gone from that scenario to this scenario, where we've got far fewer otters. And look at that, we've got a very strange bubble at the top there. That's Greenpoint. So they really do love that. And we asked the question, what was our best predictor now? Don't worry about all that. Oh, this is, when we give popular talks, scientists, we still have to put data there. Otherwise we feel like frauds. Okay, so this is my safety net. We've got relationships like this, distance from kelp forest. That popped up. That had never been significant in our previous model. What we were picking up here was a very strong marine signal. So previously we had marine protected areas as being important, and now what we're getting is kelp forests. In red here was the single best predictor of where we were finding otters. So it wasn't wetlands anymore. In fact, their use of wetlands and estuaries had declined. Elevation was still, yes, they want to be at low elevation, and that's where we live, so there's always a relationship with the urban edge. But yeah, and there's an otter eating crayfish. So the message here was, and perhaps if I go back one, this little blip here, sorry, this little blip over here, that's really, what's interesting about that, it's a great freshwater system that we've made right close to a huge kelp bed on the Atlantic Ocean. So that combination just seemed to, and we were picking that up all over the place. Now we couldn't put these squares into the ocean where the kelp beds were, but effectively that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the otters move off our peninsula into the ocean, and we think the ocean has served as a lifesaver for the otters. And so what do our systems look like? And this is City of Cape Town data. I think it's great that the city collects these data. People get very cross with the city for not sharing it timelessly, but it takes time to put it together and analyze it. And effectively, I know it's a big graph, and this is phosphates and all rivers and all flares and detention ponds. And all I want you to pick up is the trend. Green is good and red is bad, and that's time. So we're seeing a definite drop in the quality of our water system. So phosphorus is mostly coming in the form of, so the reason, the city explains this as largely to do with grey water. So when we wash our clothes, that's where our phosphorus is lying. So we're picking up a washing machine signal in our water bodies. And then when you look at fibers, this is a CPUT study, 2024. I only found this two days ago in preparing for this. The predominant microplastic recorded is polyethylene fibers, which is in our clothing. So polyethylene is being picked up, and that's washing machines again. So residential laundry waste is entering the catchment in the upper areas in condition with failures of the wastewater treatment works. And these fibers are not regarded as good for systems. They're regarded as a threat to biodiversity and to freshwater ecosystem health. So this system is being impacted, and as I said, I'm going to be asking you to become scat warriors, and hopefully we can understand how much of this is being ingested by the otters and try and understand what the long-term implications are. But similar things are happening with nitrogen, although not nearly as severely. So nitrogen is not as much of a problem, but it's funny enough, when nitrogen's low and phosphorus is high, that's when we really get our blooming of microalgae and of the toxic variety. So that combination's bad. But once again, a negative signal, more nitrogen coming into the system. And if we have a look at Hart Bay, so that was your system. If you have a look at Hart Bay, where I lived for a long time, and where I started to watch the otters and understand the otters, we're seeing there's the phosphates again increasing, and even more worrying because of the township in Hart Bay, we're seeing a massive increase in E. coli. So this graph here, green is good, black is the worst, kind of unacceptable levels of E. coli, and anything basically other than green is showing you that you shouldn't really be having contact with that water. And so that's really posing a serious health risk not only to the people but to the otters. And so the otters having to go down to the marine area and forage. Here's Nicola collecting scat. I have to say, working on the peninsula is extraordinarily dangerous. So some of my students work in protected areas like Kafue in Zambia or Kruger National Park. That's easy. You work here on the peninsula, she was held up at gunpoint. You know, I mean, sure. And all that took was that little, well, she's not wearing a backpack, it's gone. But yeah, this was the most dangerous part of her whole study was collecting scat. So those of you who do volunteer, this is the challenge. Our green belts are fairly tricky spaces, but this is gold. You can get so much information from this. And in particular, what they eat. So here's a petri dish of once Nicola has sorted through that feces, cleaned it, and she can then start identifying what they're eating. Marine fish, this is what it looks like if you're foraging in our rivers and estuaries. You've got bird feathers, you've got mammal fur, so they're quite a broad diet. You've got frog bones, freshwater fish scales, and you can then start looking at what are they eating at polluted sites versus less impacted sites. And this was a bit of a surprise for us. In less impacted sites like Cape of Good Hope, a lot of marine. And we attribute that to the fact that their wetlands and their rivers are quite small. They're small systems, they don't carry a lot of food. So they're getting a lot of marine food. But we also would have thought maybe less fresh water, it's a bit of a misnomer, maybe fresh water, surely they should be avoiding it if it's so polluted, but actually what happens in these freshwater systems is they become eutrophic, and many species, especially exotic species of fish, can capitalize on it. They become extraordinarily rich. And I was just hearing from a colleague of mine, Paul, who lives in Marina. What do you call it, Marina? Gama, yeah, that there's huge fish in the system here. We actually did, we sampled all the systems. We sampled the rivers, we sampled the wetlands and the estuaries. We recorded all the prey that was there. And it's true, we got very large exotic fish species and indigenous in the estuaries and the wetlands. But they really took a hiding during the extended drought that ended in 2018, close to day zero. So what we're seeing then is that these eutrophic systems do provide a lot of fish, but this is where the ecological trap comes in, because this is an aerial view of the system from the beach through to the Sunflower system. And roads might be the biggest immediate threat to otters, and most of the otters on the peninsula that we recorded as dead died of roads. But there are other threats too, and pollution is the insidious one. That's the one that really worries us. So PCBs, these are one of those horrible chemicals that we use that are out there in our environment. I'll give you an example. They're used as coolants in our electrical systems. So when you see a transformer, there's often a radiator on the side of the transformer, and you often see oily, that's PCB leaking out. Well, they're supposed to have got rid of that now, but the old coolants were this. We have terrible chemicals that we put out into the environment, polychlorinated biphenyls, everyone just calls them PCBs, which really do poison animals. And we took the 12 otters that we found during the course of our study that were killed on roads, and we did postmortems on them, and 4 of them had unacceptably high levels of PCBs. And most of them were in this region of the peninsula, so close to the landfill site. So we're seeing leakage and seepage coming out of our lifestyle and getting into the otters. The difficulty is we don't really know how it's going to manifest. How am I doing for time? I'm nearly finished. And here's a big surprise, a really big surprise, rodenticides. So this was a study that we did primarily on caracal, and the percentage in the animal, these are different. We got raptors, we've got small mammals, we've got otters, mongoose, honey badger, and we found that rodenticides were present in the otters too. So 44% of the otters sampled had rodenticides. You know, that's just... And what this story is an interesting story. What happens is that in informal settlements, waste management's poor, and someone's flooded the market with very cheap rodenticides, cheap and nasty, the worst kind of chemical. That then gets put into the environment to kill the rats, and then that goes by the stormwater systems. This is the Hart Bay system into the river. And one of the first dead otters I ever saw was in Hart Bay, and when they sent it off for an autopsy, it had effectively died of rodenticide, blood thinning. Which is very difficult for an animal that has to dive and hold its breath. You know, you need good blood, and you need to be having oxygenated blood. So as the otters move towards the ocean, this is going to give them a much cleaner environment by virtue of the dilution effect. Here's a little video showing you this is an otter at one of the beaches in Simonstown. The people are standing right there, so we're going to see a lot more of this. I think it's Seaforth Beach. This is the otter grooming itself. It's got to get rid of that salt, and the people were, I mean, as it panned out, I didn't show you, but there were people all around it. So the otters are remarkably good at adapting. Now, you had a talk on seals. Sometimes seals and otters don't get on. In fact, seals are supposed to displace the otters. But have a look at this little fellow. This is on the waterfront. I just love this video because as a behavioral ecologist, there's so much information going on here. And my money would be on the otter having rabies, not the seals, the way it's behaving. I don't think it's got rabies. I'm just saying, watch the behavior. Now watch the fin here. Yep. This is the best one. Go away. I've gone. And he bites him on the flipper. And we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing, this is, I don't know if any of you have seen this video. I found this absolutely hilarious. And I love what the otter did. 4 boys exploring the world, having great fun, and the otter decides to get onto the and all that machismo gone. No dignity. It gets better, watch this. You can hear the Jaws music. Look, there she comes. There she comes. So that's the way to solve a territorial dispute. I think it's an absolutely fascinating. Yeah, what an incredible, and there were so many of these videos that were surfacing, and we're on an otter group, the authorities, SPCA, myself, and we were flooded with these stories, and it was all post-COVID, so something definitely strange did happen. One of the theories we have is that they took ownership of Dalebrook, and they took ownership of the near shore and the harbour, because we went away. And during the anthropause, as they call it, they took over, and then they got, hold on, what are you doing in our space? At the one and only hotel, there's some fantastic stories there. They took over the swimming pool, and as people came back in and put their toes in the water, bite. And that was their swimming pool until they had to put barriers up. And then when the what we've done on the waterfront is we've made beautiful canals. We've made a mosaic of fairly clean marine water, and there's a lot of food there. And so the otters are using it, and they were biting. People on subs were biting their toes. So there's a full-time employee. Two Oceans has been wonderful. They've employed someone full-time just to go out there and educate people and warn them that the otters can and do bite, and that they must be careful when going in the water with them. I'm going to finish. One of my friends said if I go over time, she's going to lynch me, but there was 15 minutes of introduction. You realize that, okay? I'm going to finish with a very interesting story about trophic cascades and ecology. So this is not an otter. This is a sea otter from North America, and they love to eat urchins. Isn't that amazing? They go down, they get a whole lot, and they put them on their on their stomach like this while they eat. It's like a plate. Then they eat one at a time, and it's remarkable. And you always see it like this. So those are not nipples. And what happened is that at one stage they were harvested for their fur. A lot of Russian, that was the main demand for the Russian market. They loved the fur. And that caused a crash in the otter population. And when the otters weren't eating the urchins weren't doing what urchins do. And what urchins do is they eat seaweed, and in particular the kelp. So they lost the kelp forest. And when they lost the kelp forest, it's effectively like losing the forest. They lost everything that was dependent on the kelp forest. So an entire system was degraded through the removal of what we call a keystone species in this regard. Now, otters have moved into the ocean. And when they're in freshwater systems, they are top dog. They're the apex predator. So now what happens when you go into the ocean? There's bitey-bitey's out there. And they like these sized, yeah? That's kind of a juvenile seal is about the size of an otter. So it's a dangerous space to go into. So while they're escaping the eutrophic polluted waters of our inland areas, what are the consequences of this? And then particularly, sorry, just to go back, the sharks used to go to Seal Island to get fat pups, young of the year, that have been nursed full of blubber. That's what they want. Once they become wise and no longer available to these sharks, then the sharks move inshore and start taking the yellowtail and moving down the coast. Yellowtail full of oils. So once again, the sharks are targeting that, and that's why we would see them along the inshore regions. So here's a large shark going past Fishhook, looking mostly for fish, but opportunistically nibbling on the odd human. Oops. Okay, so I've lost that slide. Okay, not to worry, that is a killer whale, an orca, biting a white shark. And the reason why I put that picture in is because the orcas have fundamentally changed the entire ecosystem of false bay. I'm sure you've read about it. The true top predator has arrived, and the true top predator has displaced the apex predator, the one that was dominating the space. And so the sharks have left. The shark spotters, yeah, good job now. I mean, there's very little negative interactions happening between people and sharks, and of course that's very good news for this chap and these people who like to spend time in the ocean. And so the sort of lasting image for me or the lasting thought about this is that sometimes it's us that perturb a system, and sometimes it's a natural phenomenon, like two top predators coming into a system and changing the whole space. So while the otters have moved into the marine protected areas and into the kelp beds, we think that it's okay from a predation perspective because the sharks have mostly gone. We've still got 7 gills, but they've mostly gone to the Seal Island. So they've left the kelp beds too. So the 7 gills have moved to where the white sharks were, and this entire system has rearranged itself, which is phenomenal and probably good news for what would be an easy snack for a shark, in my opinion. So to the take-home messages, in the Western Cape, Cape Clawless otters have adapted to live and forage in transformed areas. They're remarkably good at exploiting, especially new freshwater systems that we've made, like Greenpoint. There's evidence to suggest, unfortunately, that long-term costs come in the formation of bioaccumulation. So there's an ecological trap. That's what we're seeing here. They're being lured into these places, but there are long-term consequences of which we don't understand the implications. Marine protected areas with kelp beds are vital for the conservation of urban otters. And citizen science, you, the public. We could never do this research without you. We just don't have the human power, the eyes, the ears. So we need citizen scientists. It's such a good synergy. The data, all the data that you've seen today, came from members of the public who just leveraged their daily experiences of walking their dogs or walking on the beach and feeding that into us, and we could put that into models and come up with important predictions to show that peninsular otters are here to stay, but not in the way that we used to know in our freshwater systems. And so the challenge is huge, and it's the engineers who are going to have to come up with solutions, and the mayor who's investing a huge amount of money in upgrading our our sewer infrastructure. And that's what we need, because that's the only way we're going to change the landscape and bring the otters back into this interface. Thank you.